Well, thank you everyone for being here with us today. This is exciting because I'm a fan of the outdoors. Utah's a big outdoor mecca, we call it, and we have a renowned adventurer, climber that just happened to make equipment for his own fun, and then Dan Pische, nationally renowned SBA Director of International Trade. So let me just do a quick intro. Daniel Pische serves as National Director of Trade Finance with the U.S. Small Business Administration, the Office of International Trade in Washington, D.C. He's responsible for the design and delivery of export loan programs and oversight of the national staff of export finance managers. And I'm going to add, we're on a committee with the 7A programs through the small business, and he's allowed me to be a part of that and really appreciate that, to give input to the national programs. Prior to joining the SBA, Dan was a senior vice president at First American Bank for more than 15 years, where he led their trade finance division and was member of Senior Loan Committee. He served as Utah Department of Commerce Trade Finance Advisory Council member, and during the second charter term as the SBA's ex officio representative on the third chartered term. He holds a bachelor's in finance from Northern Illinois University and an Evans Scholar alumni. Let's give him a hand. Thanks for being here, Dan.
Thank you.
It's nice because he was in my shoes. He was a banker, so he understands the small business and what you're going through. Next, we have Peter Metcalf, was a lead co-founder of Black Diamond Equipment in 1989. How many outdoor companies do we have in the room today? Outdoor or brand, retail brand, great. 1989 served as its chief executive officer and president until 2015, during which he took the company public and acquired POC, Gregory Mountain Products, and the Austrian-based Avalanche Transceiver, did I say that right? Safety equipment company, and was the president of Black Diamond Inc. from 2015 through 2016, served as director from 1989 to 2015 as CEO Emeritus, and he's an advisor of the company's senior management team and brand ambassador. He also served and serves on the board of several outdoor industry trade nonprofit organizations from 1982 to 1989. Metcalf served as general manager and president of Chouinard Equipment and subsidiary of Lost Arrow Patagonia Corporation. And prior to that, he was the instructor for the Colorado Outward Bound School, an oil field roughneck, and remains a lifelong technical rock climber, alpinist. In fact, let's give him a hand here. We did a little pre-call to meet each other, and he had just come back from a climbing trip. How did it go?
Excellent. Had a wonderful time. Yeah, it's still a big passion of mine.
Great. Let me start, kind of go back to the beginning, to your stories. Dan, what's your story with global trade and the SBA? Tell us a little bit.
Yeah, thanks for having me here, Golden. So I came into trade by accident. And as Golden, as you mentioned, I was a lender in the community banking space based out of Chicago, had a background in asset-based lending and special assets during the financial crisis, and came into trade that way. And one of the areas that we saw as a community bank based in the Midwest, we could use trade as a differentiator. So when I had the opportunity to take over that portfolio and then eventually the product line, saw real opportunities to use it to serve the needs of our clients. That took me down to Miami, where I lived for about 6 years, and I'm now, a banker turned bureaucrat. I'm trying to learn my best in the public sector, and kind of came to Washington in my current role, through another accident. I was on that Commerce Committee. Saw opportunities to improve the programs that we were offering, and then when the position opened up, friends from industry called and said, "Well, you've been complaining about all the things that needed to change. Are you gonna try to?" And a friend encouraged me to ask my wife, who we were planning to move back to Chicago at the time, and she said, "I'd rather go to DC than back to Chicago." And now I work for the government, and that's how that worked out.
Well, and he's a mover and a shaker. Has been a great, become a great friend, and has helped Zions Bank and spent many hours coming from D.C. to help us. And I would say that a comment was made by the president of World Trade Center Utah, Jonathan, about 95% of the world's consumption is outside the U.S. And so there's a massive experience. And I think as you start lending to some of these small businesses, you realize the opportunity.
Absolutely.
Peter, what's your story as an entrepreneur? You really had to grow this brand, and as an enthusiast for climbing, how did you get involved with starting this business and kind of your background going global?
Yeah, okay. Climbing, alpinism, mountaineering forged my life from being a 12-year-old Boy Scout and just joining the right troop. And at that point in time, it really, it took my life, and it was a little bit like a Zen or almost a samurai lifestyle. You committed everything to it. And in the early 80s, I happened to run across a guy by the name of Yvon Chouinard, the founder of Patagonia, who had a little climbing equipment company called Chouinard Equipment that was $900,000 and descending quickly because his focus wasn't on it. So he asked me to come in, and though I knew nothing about business, he felt that after an extended interview, the intimacy, the insights, the creativity, and involvement with the activity was enough, and he would train me on the business side. So I went to work for him. Built the company up to a couple of $1 million in the early, mid-'80s when tort law in America went through a revolutionary change. And companies making playground equipment, football helmets, bike helmets, climbing equipment, many of them were sued into bankruptcy, not because of products failing, but failure to warn, not having the right instructional information, not having the appropriate warning language. So with that, he put the company into bankruptcy, asked me to liquidate it as quickly as possible and be done with it. And that was an epiphany, because I realized there was an incredible opportunity here to create a really unique company at this time with growth in the marketplace. We had these challenges, but there were ways to overcome these. You know, my approach was that of a climber. Like, it's a wonderful challenge to have. And so the vision for the company at that time was, okay, we're going to create something really unique in the global marketplace, a company that's going to be one with the sports we serve, absolutely indistinguishable from it. And that the reason for being that timeless, why are we creating this business, was to champion the issues of great importance to a fellow community of mountain sports enthusiasts. And how we were going to do that, or what were we going to do, it was, number one, to bring to the marketplace truly innovative gear of exemplary durability, built to last at good value. Number two was, as I said, these activities at this time, they've become really mainstream today. But back then it was really, like I said, a Zen, almost samurai lifestyle. And what I wanted the company to do was to both celebrate and affirm your decision to follow the lifestyle of being a climber and a mountaineer. And this was before the internet, so it's through catalogs and things like that. And then thirdly, as I said, many companies had been, because of the revolution in tort law, had been sued out of existence. So to me we were going to champion those issues that included your privilege to access the wild places where you do these sports and to be a champion for their preservation for future generations as well as yourself. And so that was the reason for being and to start this business up. And right at that time, I realized at this point, there wasn't any really meaningful global brands. And there wasn't any company really that I saw in the marketplace that at Chouinard we had competed against that was really built by people in the sport who had that insight and that intimacy. And I like to say that with intimacy comes insight, and with insight comes the opportunity for innovation. And so we have that, we can change things, and we can be global, because there weren't any other global businesses at that time in our sports that had that attitude. So, and part of being global, I realized too at this point in time, was that these markets at this time, these communities were not overly large. So to be able to amortize the cost that R&D was, the level of R&D I envisioned that was required in manufacturing prowess and capital investment was such that you had to have a global marketplace. So to amortize all of that out. So from the very beginning, it was, we need to be global.
And I love that story, and I think that was one of the nuggets as we took away from our conversation is, a lot of people, they want to scale it here in the U.S. and then they go global. You took an approach of this, if I can use the word obsession with perfection, making sure your product was safe, that you were following the guidelines in the U.S. That's expensive, that R&D, and you took that to a level so that you could quantify and pay for that R&D cost, and I think that's a great takeaway. Let's go to Dan. Tell us what's your role with the SBA today, and how can people use the SBA? Just as Peter was talking about, R&D costs. You've got all these R&D costs. So you've got to use up your cash flow, and then you need capital for going global and selling to buyers and going to trade shows. What's your role in the SBA, and what's the purpose of all these trade programs?
Golden, I just got to echo what you say. I mean, I love Peter. I love that story. I think that is the reason that, that's really the mission of the SBA and why we have an Office of International Trade is we recognize how much of the innovation in the country comes from small businesses. They really are an economic engine for innovation. And so my role at the SBA, so I'm one of the directors inside the Office of International Trade. And we have a policy shop. We have a grant program that we run, and then our finance team is our largest by head count. And really what we do is we work both with businesses and with lenders to assist with international transactions. And so the SBA is probably best known for our capital programs that support building equipment, business acquisitions. Basically, you're buying things. Trade is really born of working capital, and that's really what our office focuses on, because a lot of international opportunities focus or hinge on the ability to have enough working capital to see the, if you're producing goods, see that order through, see that project through. So from a lending perspective, we work with our more than 2,000 lending institutions across the country, from community and mission-based lenders all the way up to money center banks. And I'd say our sweet spot really is the regional bank crowd. I mean, Golden, that's where you're currently at. That's where I came from. I think those are the lenders that are really focused on some of the larger growth companies, but still really working alongside them. So our team works with the lenders to, look at how our programs can fill gaps within their program offerings. And then we work with businesses who have opportunities to evaluate if our programs can be a solution. We're not the only solution. We have our colleagues from XM in the salon next to us. We have, obviously banks have conventional programs. So we're really there to help fill in gaps and ultimately assist that business, assist their lender, however we can to see that transaction through, because we know how transformative those opportunities are.
Wonderful. What would you say is a good, one of your success stories, having come from the SBA world or from the bank side, then into, you've seen the whole country using these products. Give us a sample.
No, it's interesting because I go from working at one institution my entire career, seeing largely Midwestern, and then being able to spend a lot of time in South Florida. So many of the opportunities, I use the word transformational quite often because I'll use the example of some of the manufacturing companies that we take on, where you might have maybe a second generation company who's now starting to grow. Right, they look at the international market as a place of expansion. More companies are certainly being, globally minded or born global early in formation, but so many times it's a transformational opportunity. They get, think of an established company here locally that gets a really large order relative to their size, and putting our credit hats on, Golden, that can be tough from a bank's perspective. No matter how much you like the company, if they're going 50% year over year growth, that's really difficult. And I think that's really a good spot for the SBA or for Exim Bank to come in and help support a transaction, because, fast forward the clock a little bit, that company, a year later is not a couple $1 million company. They've grown by 50%, and now they have a higher baseline. And you spin that forward a few times, and you really can take a small business, into the middle market space, which, the SBA I think we have the S in our name, but it's really SME, and it's the vast majority of companies in the country that would fit into our size standards. So, it really helps catapult those companies, and a lot of times manufacturing and anybody in product design really benefit from it because they can take on these large opportunities, with our lending partners and ultimately, hopefully, with our support.
Yeah, and I like how you mentioned that. We sometimes hear SBA, small business, and so we think, $1 million revenue, but it's really those small, medium enterprise. And Peter, let me go back to you. You've been in, when you used the SBA in your story. Tell us a little bit about your story. But I was surprised with the size of your business at that time. It was a little bit larger than a startup revenue size business. So tell us your experience with the SBA, Peter.
Sure. So I should start by saying that started the business where Sherman Equipment had been in Southern California in the late 80s, which was a really challenging time at the end of the Michael Milliken era to be borrowing money. And so we ultimately, the financing I raised through friends, family, and fools, about just under $1 million worth of equity. And then I had those on the outside. I wanted control for the employee group. Every employee could buy in who was being hired. But the outsiders had to buy 1 unit of subordinated debenture for every piece of stock they got in order to keep control. And that was going to pay 15% interest payable each year, with the principal being paid back in 5 years with hope we could refinance it. And then the working capital line we got from a commercial finance company at 12.5% with 2 points to originate. And we were in a lockbox, so for the assets. So it was a really difficult financing situation. And I was a student of Jack Stack of Springfield Remanufacturing, the great game of business, and taught everybody about how we're financing as a asset-based lender, about work in process, finished goods, inventory, and how we had to work. So we made the decision to come to Utah, which was made even before we had the doors fully open, because I wanted location to reside on the asset side of the balance sheet and be accretive with the vision to be one with the sports we serve, absolutely indistinguishable from it. And came here to Salt Lake, and in the process of coming here, trying to find our home, no developer wanted to make any investment in a young leveraged startup like us. And fortunately came across a bank repoed property that just happened to be owned by Zions Bank. And I had already been meeting with Zions over the year of coming back and forth, trying to see if any bank in this state would finance us in my lifetime, and hit it off pretty well with the Zions team. And so when I came across this property, they already knew me, and we'd been working for a year. And to finance that facility from Zions, there were some IRBs on that we assumed, but we also needed tenant improvement loan. And at that point in time, the first SBA loan we actually got was asset-based, right, for the tenant improvements on the property. And then as we started growing very quickly, our banker at Zions, who was our banker for over 20 years, Michael Bruff, said, look, with what you're doing, immediately we got, Europe was going to be much more competitive because of the indigenous competitors. So we're starting there, but on a small scale. But Japan, we were there competing on the same footing as the Europeans. They didn't have an indigenous industry. And there's a huge market, if you don't know, of climbing and mountaineering in Japan. So we had big demand right out of the starting gate, and the individual and the company we were working with was not capital rich, but very trustworthy. And so some of the initial funding, I believe, was financing so we could do some open terms to Japan. The European business was being done on LC, but that still needed some financing for the inventory that we had to buy. So that was some of the initial SBA loans. And we worked with the SBA for many years until we reached a point with our size and scale and the quality of our balance sheet that was finally a decision that we wouldn't need that. But that took a number of years.
How, Peter, we live in a climate today where VC has been a popular name, and you went to some of these, people have to make a decision between, should I give up ownership of my company? should I go to the bank? You know, you've got easy capital. You go get VC, go find Fools and Friends or VC, or go SBA. And how did that affect you in the long run by going the hard way, having to get some of the red tape of SBA, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But
Yeah, so in the short term, it definitely was the hard way, almost the impossible way. Yeah. But there was a realization by myself that in order to achieve and create the company we wanted to create, it had to be long-term thinking, long-term strategy, not short-term. Thinking in the neighborhood of really 10 to 20 years before we're going to have any kind of meaningful liquidity event or anything else. And I did obviously meet with investment bankers and private equity, and basically the terms that were needed were such that it was clear we would not have that ability to be thinking on our own in that time frame, and we would lose control. And to me, myself, with the employee group, I wanted to have control of this. So it was, okay, how much can we raise from the individuals, from the friends, family, and employees? Every employee, we did a case-op. Out of the starting gate, you could take, if you're a manufacturing employee, you're going to operate a press at $8 an hour, but this is the 80s. If you had any money in a 401k, you could invest it in an opening equity position at the same price I was buying my stock at. So we could have control there. But it also meant that we were going to be exceedingly highly leveraged. And I explained to everybody what that meant and why we wanted to do that. But it was that leverage, working with the SBA, and really having a totally committed, tenacious group of employees, which I guess I like to say that you have, as you run a business, 3 constituents, right? You have your employees, you have your shareholders, and you have your customers. When they're all the same, it's a lot easier to get alignment on your strategy, and that's what I had at Black Diamond. Yeah. So everybody went along with that, but the beauty of that was that we held control, and it was 20 years before we had the major liquidity event, and we were able to create a global company, one that was one of the sports we serve, and was really making a difference. And it was because of the discipline of the leverage, and it forces you to be more creative, not to be sloppy, be tight with your money, and just to do things in a lean way. But if you can share that through your open book management with your employees, and your investors know in the long term, this is looking good, and you're doing regular planning and updates to your employees, it can work out. And for Black Diamond, it worked out brilliantly.
Excellent. Dan, as you've listened to Peter a couple of times on this, things have changed. I think the SBA's listened more to, these experiences, people having to bootstrap, and what advances have happened in the SBA in the last 10, 20 years to help these companies. If you've been to ISPO, the trade, for the outdoor companies going to Germany, trying to sell their products, it's a challenge. It's overwhelming. You're walking the room. You're trying to figure out how you're going to sell internationally. All of a sudden you meet someone from Vietnam for your sewing. You've got to come up with how to pay them, and then on the other hand, you've got to try to sell to buyers internationally. What has the SBA done recently to help companies like Black Diamond?
Sure. I think, Peter, your story and Black Diamond's story about growth, the use of debt, deciding to go the long route instead of private equity or venture capital, I think it comes down to a personal decision for the business, for the team, for the ownership group, in terms of, what are you looking to build and over what period of time. Debt is going to be a more slow growth strategy compared to venture capital. So, in terms of what the SBA does, I think it supports a lot of those scenarios, from a facility build out to patient capital to working capital for growth. Those are some of the areas that we support often. And I'd say the modern era of SBA lending began in 2010, so post-financial crash with the Jobs Act. It's a point where the SBA program went from $2 million to $5 million, which seems like a relatively modest amount, but it was a substantial increase in our lending. So just to put it in context, in 2010, before the increase, it was about a $10 billion a year program in terms of guarantees, and now we're up north of 30. So the program has grown threefold in basically the last decade. And I think we're obviously learning from it. The pandemic response, a lot of the programs from the Paycheck Protection Program to the EIDL loan program ran through SBA, and really realizing the role we play with small businesses, with our lending partners around the country, are these success stories, right? We call it the graduation, but it's the best day for us is the day when a business stops using our programs. Yeah. Counterintuitive. My banking it's sort of, you'd think like, oh, we want to keep them as clients for a long time, but it's actually the day they stop is when our role was satisfied. We're a catalyst, if you will. We're not and we're there with our lending partners, and just recognizing how varied the needs are, from patient capital and think tooling for your production, for your production side, to taking on those new buyers, Golden, that you mentioned. You go to a show, you get a large order. How do you satisfy it? Do you have the capital? I'm sure we've both seen many times where a company has, I got this great order. Like, I wish I would have known about it like 2 months ago, so we could have got the line of credit in place. Yeah. So really trying to help companies take on those opportunities and ultimately do it in a way that's conducive to the realities of C&I lending, in the banking world.
You touched on those large orders. What a lot of small businesses don't quite understand. From a banking side, you're looking at the past, and so you've done $1 million orders. So when you get that $10 million order, the bank says, oh, you don't have the past to show this $10 million order. What has the SBA done to change that, to allow you to look forward to a large, substantial order?
Yeah, so I categorize our working capital programs two different directions, right? We have our backward-looking program, which is standard asset-based lending. That's a really well-developed industry nationally. Certainly, we have a role in supporting it, but our true benefit, I think, comes in the forward-looking capacity, which is what we refer to as our transaction-based line or our project line. So that's a situation where, when you look backward, you're pooling your receivables and inventory on balance sheet to provide liquidity to support upcoming orders. And I think that does a really good job of helping manage situations where growth is relatively modest, right? You're not, I guess you're, as a mountaineer, staring up a mountain, right? Yeah. In terms of growth. The forward-looking side, I think, does a better job when you take on a substantial opportunity. I equate it to having a baseline business where that's your day-to-day, and then you get this really large order. So how do you take it on when your current working capital, your current capital and cash position isn't sufficient? So we can fund through, with our support through lenders, effectively 100% of cost in the vast majority of scenarios, direct cost. So, from a company attending a show, that's really powerful to know that, like, if I get an order, as long as it's within these parameters and my line can support it, we know we can cover 100% of our costs without impacting the core business, without impacting the day-to-day. And I think that's the difference, is segregating the day-to-day business from that new opportunity, so that eventually that new opportunity gets put into the baseline for that business and then really provides a good footing to grow from there.
Yeah. I have to give Dan kudos for something. We're an inland state. We don't have a port on the west, and we have a lot of businesses that, some of these products, when Peter was, trying to build and find distributors or partnering, the SBA, we realized there was a glitch for a company from Utah. They had the product that was available had to source from the U.S. So I gave Dan a call and said, we got a problem here. We're buying products from Asia. To really utilize these great SBA products, they have to bring them back into Utah and then sell them back to Germany. It doesn't make any sense. Dan took a common sense approach. Tell us about what happened.
So we recognize that. I think within the trade industry, sustainable trade is certainly a hot topic, and I think logistics is a big part of it. Not only from a carbon perspective, but also just from an economics perspective. Moving goods costs money. You want to shorten that chain as much as possible. So, borrowing a term from the Department of Commerce, it's called foreign-to-foreign export. It's just recognizing a U.S. firm has a global supply chain. Some of the goods aren't always going to ship from the United States, but that's okay, because we know that some of the goods do ship from the United States, and those still are the jobs, and that's just the reality of trade. So we were able to update our export definition within the established statutory bounds of our program, because the program is there to help develop exporters in all capacities, and we recognize that companies that might have production overseas or even here, on the continent, North America, we want to make sure our programs are able to support their business. Make sure we're managing whatever associated credit risk is created in that situation. But we were able to work around that, and we were able to update our definition to include that foreign to foreign category, recognizing the role that plays for a lot of SME exporters in the country.
And as long as it helps the U.S., the company, it increases U.S. GDP through export, so it's a win-win.
Yep, exactly.
Excellent. Peter, they didn't have these options at the time. You had to bootstrap a lot. So let's put you in. Let's send you to Bavaria. Go to ISPO. It's intimidating. You walk into a show. There's all these people, and you don't know who is who. Who's a distributor? Give us some tips on partnering, distributing. What you did to find your way in this big world.
Yeah, no, it's very well said. And by the way, the first trade show, the ISPO show in Munich, Germany, the big global outdoor show in 1989, Stephen Harper, the Prime Minister of Canada's remarks about as the Soviet Union collapsed, just the naivety and the hope that occurred. And walking in that ISPO in 1989, it was a game-changing show at that time because everything was changing. You were trying to think about the global markets, the opportunities that are here. I mean, it was just incredible. And also on top of that, for those that are not that familiar with the EEC was formed after World War II as a way to try to prevent wars, trade. But it was not that integrated. So in 1989, there were not standards for a lot of food, equipment, and other things. So, for example, there's a point here I'm going to make, is that the British could not ship their beer into Germany because they had the German purity law from 1550 and how they defined beer. So they could keep German beer out. And the English defined marmalade in a certain way that almost had to be made in Great Britain, so people couldn't ship jam into Great Britain. And then I bring this up because in climbing equipment and whatnot, there are different standards, both for performance, strength, quality assurance, and then we had obviously different currencies. And it was all trade barriers. And this was all in that moment in '89. The community had committed to changing all that within a few years, and then going by the end of that millennium, 1999, to a single currency. So my attitude walking around that show was that we have to find right now distributors, independent distributors. It's the only thing we can do right now, but learn from them. And it would be a temporary phenomenon because what we're going to do as soon as we can is set up our own business over there, because my belief was that with all these trade barriers and the legacy, the Germans designed equipment and gear for Germans, and the Italians did it for Italians with their flair, and the French did it their way and this way. And none of the businesses really thought about truly being global. And for Black Diamond, it was, we're going to be a global brand, American roots, but people have come from all over the world to come climbing here. This is our legacy in this history of this sport. So we want to be a global brand and not be weighted down or anchored by these legacies, and not try to. We're never going to out French the French, never out German the Germans, or never out Italian the Italians. But if we could ultimately get to a number 2 market share position in every one of those countries, we would be dominant overall. So we began with independent distributors. Having been in the industry and having been a climber, I knew a lot of people. So I was networking, as were some of my colleagues. And we found people, and through that process at the show, interviewed them, went to see their business. And I want to say is that it was all LC, so that risk was reduced. But what you learn very quickly is that nobody cares about your business and your brand and how you market as much as you do. So if you think about in your domestic market how competitive a marketplace can be, and you think about how you sweat blood to succeed in your marketing and in your product and your connectivity to the customer and how you serve them, what you find when you're spending time with all these independent distributors, they're already having some other brands, and they're going to do it their way, and they're going to take your marketing materials and do it that way and whatever. And ultimately, as I said, the vision was to set up our own business. In about 95, we were able to do that, finding through networking the right individual, brought him to the U.S. to work at Black Diamond for 6 months, then sent him back. I went over there for a year to build that business up, but to do a European version of what we are in America, which to be the same thing in another country, you have to be a bit different because the cultural attributes, the way they interpret marketing materials and whatnot is a little bit different. So to be the same, you have to be a bit different, but the product is the same. It's a global product. And so we decided to be in Switzerland because if we're in Germany, you'd be German, and if you're in Italy, you'd be Italian. The Germans hate I'm being very stereotypical here. There's all these national attitudes. But the Swiss, nobody loves them, but nobody hates them. So it's like, okay, let's be in Basel, very efficient place, multilingual, and it's kind of neutral. And that's where we started the business. Ultimately, a few years ago, half a decade ago, moved it to Innsbruck, Austria. But again, the SBA, I think, did come into play at that time because it was our inventory. We had to ship inventory of product we made in Asia and some in Europe there. And then, of course, we were a major manufacturer here in Utah and had to ship that. But we were still owning that. And it was getting the financing to have that covered.
Yeah. Excellent. Thanks for that. I think we picked up a few tips as we try to navigate the global world. Dan, just very briefly in the last couple of minutes here, tell us about this new product. We're only giving you about 60 seconds here, but we have a new, Dan has listened to the banks and what customers are dealing with. They sometimes have to get 2 different products to do this. Tell us about the new hybrid you built.
Well, it's a lot of what drew me to the opportunity to come to the SBA, but we've been able to work with our colleagues at the SBA to adapt our existing export working capital program, so our flagship structured trade product, into a domestic product. And I think there's kind of this false binary that it's either domestic or international, when in reality we know most SMEs are predominantly domestic, and international trade is a growth opportunity. So in order to help the lenders find really a more functional tool for the business, we've been able to create a mirror image of our export product to work on the domestic stage, which will also have function for exports. And what that means is that a company can now have a line of credit to support orders regardless of where the buyer is, right? And know that they can go into a trade show, understand that if they get a buyer in California or in Canada, they have a line that's built to meet that need. And hopefully for the lenders, it simplifies the process. And I think anytime we can get out of the way of our lenders and their borrowers without taking undue credit risk, I think that's a net win for the community.
Yes, excellent. As we finish up, great examples of the power and connection we have right with Washington, D.C. to help the small business grow and thrive. We have Peter on our advisory board for Zions Bank, just as a voice of reason to help companies. Don't give up. Don't go to easy money. Go to build a brand. And you've done a great job having a wonderful product. I've enjoyed using it, and thank you. Let's give both of our guests a round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you.